This is a Gear Network production.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's your boy, Mr. Perez, and you're listening to the Better Live Than Dead podcast, brought to you exclusively on Gear Network. Listen in.
Welcome to the 18th episode of the Better Live Than Dead podcast, and joining me today, right out the chute, local indie wrestling star Eric Emanon. How you doing today, man?
Hey, everybody. Gear Network world. It's good to be on the Better Live Than Dead portion of the Gear Network. Then
It's nice to have you.
Sitting there with JC Money.
Now, first off, before we get started, you can follow Eric on Twitter at Eric Emanon. And today, Eric, you're actually here to promote a book that you are in, Eat, Sleep, and Wrestle, which is available on Amazon through GearNetwork.com.
Absolutely.
You go through GearNetwork.com, you click the link, you buy the book. It's $10.57 in paperback or $4.99 for the Kindle version. And not only do you get the book, but you help out us at GearNetwork.com. Now, if you could, Eric, tell us a little about this book.
So the book Eat, Sleep, Wrestle. Eat, Sleep, Wrestle is by John Cosper. He wrote the book Bluegrass Brawlers back in 2013. And this book just kind of goes through the lifestyle and overall, behind the scenes aspect of independent professional wrestling as a whole. You'll see guys like Aaron Williams, Crazy Mary Dobson, DJ Hyde from CZW, myself, Jim Olivencia. He's a ESW guy who was down there for a while. Madman Pondo, Mark Haas, another local Rochester guy. Mickey Knuckles, we've seen her wrestle in Rochester a few times. Tyson Ducks, he's a NXT, WWE guy, Mike Quackenbush, you name it. There's a bunch of guys in this book that give you their experiences on the road, what made them get into the business, their crazy experiences, international experiences, stuff like that. There's a lot of pictures, so you can kind of put some names to faces and stuff like that. Overall, everything I've seen so far, it's been a great read. I'm about halfway through the book right now, so.
Well, I'm certainly excited to get my hands on a copy and check it out because with the Better Live Than Dead podcast, we enjoy wrestling and we enjoy reading. I'm not sure about Perez. I'm pretty sure he likes to read. I'll have to ask him about it, but I'm fairly confident that he'll enjoy the book as well. But since we have you here, I do want to ask you too. I know you're a big Boston sports fan, and this week, as we'll talk about later in the podcast, the Boston Red Sox signed left fielder Hanley Ramirez and third baseman Pablo Sandoval. What are your thoughts on those moves?
Well, I'm going to tell you right now, Hanley Ramirez is 9 years in the making kind of thing. Traded him away, was it 2005, I think it was, for Beckett. And he was down in Miami, and you watched him grow as a player, and watched him grow as a hitter. And overall, having somebody like Hanley Ramirez on the team is going to be an overall spark that I think they need in the lineup. And then you get Kung Fu Panda Pablo Sandoval, who we were talking about this a little bit ago. One of the greatest hitters in postseason history. He was batting 425. 425, 426, and then you got David Ortiz, who bats a career 450 in the playoffs in the postseason. So it's you get these two guys there, and it's going to be a game of anything you can do, I can do better, per se. And I think that's going to be a great spark to their lineup. Now, what I'm really crossing my fingers for right now is a possible Cole Hamels acquisition. Depending on what we have to give up for him, I think that could overall put some spark into our pitching that we would need, as well as John Lester. If we could pick him back up as well, I think that overall would be a solid start to the 2015 baseball season.
It's going to be funny because when you listen to the podcast later in the show, Perez hates talking about the New York Yankees or about the Boston Red Sox because he's not like a big Yankees fan. He is a big Yankees fan. He's made it known. So whenever I mention the Red Sox, he groans. Mm-hmm. But here's the deal. The Yankees aren't doing anything right now. The Red Sox are doing everything. The Red Sox making the big deals, making the moves, talking to everybody, offering big deals. They offered John Lester a big deal apparently recently. They've been talking about Cole Hamels. I don't know if they're going to get Cole Hamels. I really hope they end up with John Lester. But hey, at this point, beggars can't be choosers. If the team gets better, we all win.
Well, you got to think, they're offering contracts, 6 years, 120, 130 million to John Lester. They offered a big long-term contract to Hanley. They offered a decent-sized contract to Pablo Sandoval. But the thing is that if you want to get a big ball player and you want to get somebody who's going to be a superstar who can more or less put the team on their back, and carry them through the downswing that has been a majority of the Red Sox downfalls when they have these bad years is, they lose one big star player and then, who's there to pick up the slack? There's not really many people there that are going to be able to, swing them out of that slump. So you get a few star hitters, you get a few star pitchers in there. You're going to notice, somebody may go down, but there's going to be a majority of those people there that'll be able to pick up the slack because they'll say, hey, we want to play at this guy's level. We want to play for this guy. We want to play like this guy. So let's do what we can to be this guy or, perfect what he's perfected. And I think that's going to lead to a lot of the Red Sox success coming up in these future years. So,
now, Eric, before we let you go, got to ask you, when is the next time fans of Eric Emanon can see you wrestle?
Well, I am going to be on the road quite a bit coming up in December. December 6th, I'm going to be down in New Albany, Indiana, making my Destination 1 wrestling debut. I will also be receiving my copy from the author, John, down there at D1W, so I think that'll be fun. That'll be my debut. I'm actually going to be fighting alongside the Madness of Tripp and Xavier Fate for a contract at D1W, which will be quite a fun time. Then after that, we have OSPW out in Buffalo, New York. That's going to be the closest I will be to Rochester coming up. That will be myself and Xavier Fate versus Deacon and Gabriel Soul. So I think that'll be fun. And then the weekend after that, December 20th, I will be down in Hazleton, Pennsylvania at PPW, Pennsylvania Premier Wrestling. What I am doing there, I don't quite know yet, but as always, it is a treat to be on the road, to be able to do what I can. And on that note, I just want to send out my thoughts and prayers with Julius Cryptic Keegan. He suffered his third seizure in about a week. So we're all kind of keeping our his thoughts and our prayers and all that good stuff. And we're trying to hope he pulls through it. Right now he's down in a hospital in Elmira. I might be making a trip out there tomorrow to go see him. And contrary to popular belief, the whole this is insight. If you read the book, you'll know a lot about this. We are a brotherhood, and no matter what, at the end of the day, love him or hate him, he's still family. You don't get along with all your family members, you don't get along with all your coworkers, but if something was to happen to him, you do feel it. You do on an emotional level, and a lot of people don't know that me and Cryptic, we trained together. He took me on the road when I was younger, and we did a lot of traveling and tag team wrestling with each other. So it's it kind of hits really close to home. And I lost a buddy of mine 2 years ago to the same kind of thing. He had a seizure and he passed, and it's not a good thing, and it's never fun to have to watch somebody go through that, especially when if anybody follows Cryptic on Facebook or Twitter, they'll see that he recently just retired from the wrestling industry, and that's more or less due to the seizure. So it's one of those things where count your lucky stars, because what you're doing today you might not be able to do tomorrow. And I'm thankful for every day that I'm going to be able to perform in front of the fans, in front of the audience, and be traveling on the road. So if you do get a chance, please support your local wrestling federations, support your local indie workers. These guys are out there busting their ass a lot harder than I think a majority of the WWE guys are, and they're getting paid on the penny kind of thing, where they're not making tons of money. Not many people do get to do that. So make sure you support us. Pick up Eat, Sleep, Wrestle, Amazon, Gear Network, and make sure you follow me, Twitter, at Eric Emanon, hashtag IndyCard Mafia, hashtag Emanon State of Mind, and thank you for having me today.
Thanks for joining us, man. Like you said, get well soon, Jules. We're thinking about you. As you mentioned, it's a family thing, but it's like a competition.
Absolutely.
When you're wrestling together, you're like, this guy's an a-hole, this guy sucks. But when it comes down, when something happens to someone or someone's family, it's always put the grudges aside, put the hard feelings aside. At the end of the day, it's one big family. So like I said, get well soon, Jules. Thank you again, Eric, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
As you mentioned, Eat, Sleep, Wrestle available on Amazon through GearNetwork.com. It's only $10.57. I'm going to get my copy soon. I'll let you know what I think of it as soon as I read it. I'm sure I will enjoy it. He is at Eric Emanon on Twitter. If you want to ask him a question or anything, feel free to tweet at him. Or if you want to know the next time he's going to wrestle in your area, hit him up on Twitter. Thank you again, Eric, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
When we get back from this commercial break, Perez joins the podcast. We're going to talk some Major League Baseball. Obviously, the big moves with the Red Sox. The Diamondbacks make a big splash, and the Hall of Fame ballot for Major League Baseball was released this week. Stick around. You're not going to want to miss this here on Better Live Than Dead.
While you're listening to this podcast, make sure you follow us on social media. You can follow me at WolfSHC on Twitter. You can also follow Mr. Perez at MRLG Perez. Make sure to like the podcast on Facebook. That's facebook.com/BLTD Podcast. And make sure to follow Gear Network on Twitter at GERE Network.
John Cimino here, a.k.a. JC Money, inviting you all of you listeners, to join us on the Gear Radio Network once a week for Get Ready America, where JC and DC, the executive producer, my co-host Don Cimino, will be talking news, sports, whatever comes to our mind. It's a variety show that goes all over the place. It's awesome. You should check it out on Gear Network every week.
Hey, this is Greg Wyshynski, editor of the Puck Daddy blog on Yahoo Sports. You're listening to the Better Live Than Dead podcast.
Welcome back to the Better Live Than Dead podcast. It's Ryan Wolf here, and as you may be able to notice in the sound quality, I sound very good compared to last segment. Well, that is because I was just made aware that Mr. Perez will not be able to make the podcast today because he is, the way he coined it, violently ill, vomiting and all that stuff. So I guess this week at the Better Live Than Dead podcast, we both can just win because I'm losing my voice right now as I'm talking, and Perez is vomiting. So let's try to put this together and get through this podcast. It'll be just me for at least this segment. I think we may have a special guest in the next segment, which will be the National Football League. But right now, we're going to talk some Major League Baseball. The big stories of the week. First off, the Boston Red Sox signed left fielder Hanley Ramirez and third baseman Pablo Sandoval. Ramirez gets a 4-year, $88 million contract. The fifth year is a vesting option worth $22 million if he gets 1,050 plate appearances from 2017 to 2018, and he cannot finish 2018 on the disabled list. That option will vest. He'll make $22 million as mentioned. As for Pablo Sandoval, it's a 5-year, $95 million contract. The sixth-year option is a $17 million option with a $5 million buyout. So essentially, it's a 5-year, $90 million deal, but with the $5 million buyout guaranteed. At least it's a 5 and 95 deal. Now, this move is big for the Boston Red Sox. As you all may know by now, I'm a big Boston Red Sox fan, and Perez, I wish he was here to laugh at me because it always cracks me up when I mention the Red Sox and he just gives me a dirty look, but it's no secret the Boston Red Sox were bad last year, needed to retool offensively, and what better way to retool than to get one of the best hitters in baseball in Hanley Ramirez. Granted, he has had trouble staying healthy, but when healthy, he is a phenomenal hitter. And then you get Pablo Sandoval, a 3-time World Series champion at the hot corner, one of the best third basemen in the game, and he is a very consistent hitter as well. And both these guys should benefit from the short porch in left field. Obviously, the Green Monster will take some surefire fly ball outs and turn them into home runs or doubles or maybe long singles, depending on how hard they hit the ball. But I think, like I said, it's kind of hard for me to be impartial. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I'm a Red Sox fan, so everything I say will essentially be considered biased. But a very big move, a much-needed move by the Boston Red Sox in terms of picking up Hanley Ramirez and Pablo Sandoval. And it really has kind of started the arms race in the American League East because on Friday night, last Friday night I should say, the Toronto Blue Jays pulled off a big one. Big blockbuster in the in Major League Baseball. They acquired third baseman Josh Donaldson from the Oakland Athletics. Josh Donaldson, 268 career average, 63 home runs, 228 RBIs in 405 career games. He is the best third baseman in the game when it comes to wins above replacement. Third overall in baseball overall for the past 2 years, behind only Mike Trout and Andrew McCutchen. Obviously, you know how good they are. He has a 14.1 WAR in the last 2 seasons combined. He finished fourth in the MVP voting in 2013. Now, Donaldson is one of those guys where you could tell Oakland probably wasn't going to re-sign him, so
And he's under team control for 4 more years. So it's not like it was a big thing where they needed to dump him now. But when you look at it, Oakland has always tried to make a deal when the price is when the asking price is highest. And it seems to me that Oakland got back what they wanted in Brett Lowry, who's a 24-year-old third baseman, 4 years under team control. In 345 career games, he's got a .265 average and 43 home runs. He's still developing into the player. There's a lot of people who think he could still be a very good third baseman. I mean, he hasn't shown great numbers so far, but again, 24 years old, that's going to work on his side very well. Toronto also picked up pitcher Kendall Graveman. He pitched in all 5 levels last year, from A-ball to major leagues. There's a lot of people that believe Graveman could step into the Athletics rotation next season. I don't know why I got confused there. Sean Nolan, he was the 10th best Jays prospect judged by Baseball America before last season. And the kind of prize of the whole deal, shortstop Franklin Barreto, the 5th best prospect according to Baseball America before the 2014 season in the Jays system. Nolan also the 10th in the Jays system. I feel like I didn't mention that, but a very big deal right now for the Blue Jays. They want to try to make the playoffs again. They just made that big signing for Russell Martin. They're trying to get out of the doldrums. Last season they finished 83-77, 13 games back of the Baltimore Orioles. Maybe this move puts them at 90 wins, 92 or 93 wins. I mean, that gets you in the playoffs. But when it comes down to it, you need to have a consistent pitching staff, especially in the American League East, where you've got Baltimore, New York, Boston, and Toronto. Well, obviously not Toronto, but if we're talking about Toronto, you've got 3 other teams, Baltimore, New York, and Boston, who have great bats. I mean, Tampa is kind of on the fence because they just keep switching in older guys for younger guys, but it'll be interesting to see how that works out. Moving over to the National League side of things, Cuban defector 24-year-old Yasmani Tomas agreed to a 6-year, $68.5 million deal with the Arizona Diamondbacks. In 205 games in Cuba, he collected 30 home runs with 104 RBIs. He was scouted by many as having plus power, and it's a very big move for the new regime in Arizona. They kind of cleaned house. They absolutely did clean house in the offseason. Try to get new faces in that front office. They got a new coach, and they're just trying to go in a different direction because they haven't had much luck the past couple years. It's a very big move for a kid who's unproven. I mean, obviously you see him play in the World Baseball Classic. You see him play in Cuba. It's kind of like when the Boston Red Sox signed Rusney Castillo last season. But you look at the guys when you get a guy like Aroldis Chapman in Cincinnati or Yasiel Puig in Los Angeles. For every great guy, there's going to, at some point in time, there's going to be a guy who's not as good, and you kind of hope that every time you see a player get signed, it's not going to be him. But a lot of people expect Tomas to be a good outfielder. There have been some reports that he may not have as great of a glove as expected, but we'll certainly find out. I would assume if they're paying that amount of money for him, he'll probably start next season with the Diamondbacks, and why not? I mean, they're one of the worst teams in baseball. What's the worst that's going to happen? You guys are going to lose more games. It's not that big of a deal, but it's not that big of a deal when you're rebuilding, I should say, because it is a big deal to lose games, but it's not that big of a deal when you're trying to rebuild and figure out who's long-term going to be a part of the baseball team. Also, one last thing before we wrap this quick baseball segment up, the Baseball Hall of Fame ballot was released this week. Craig Biggio, who almost made it in last season, Mike Piazza, who's a few votes away, Jeff Bagwell, Roger Clemens, and Barry Bonds return to the ballot this year, some of the notable names. And 3 big names headline this year's ballot: Randy Johnson, Pedro Martinez, and John Smoltz, all 3 who are expected to be surefire Hall of Famers. I would expect Craig Biggio to make it in this year, too. He missed, like I said, by a few votes. But as every year goes, it's going to be interesting to find out who votes for Clemens and who votes for Bonds, because obviously as time goes on, it's only 10 years now. It used to be 15, now it's only 10, and you're off the ballot and you become a Veterans Committee vote. But we don't know what's going to happen with this steroid era in baseball, and we'll find out shortly again, because Mark McGwire, the first big steroid era name to show up, has gotten little love on the Hall of Fame ballot. Barry Bonds, I think, had around 30% last season, and Roger Clemens was around the same. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. But like I said, Randy Johnson, John Smoltz. I don't know if Pedro's a surefire first ballot Hall of Famer, but the thing about Pedro is he doesn't have the 300 wins, but he was hands down the best pitcher of his era. Absolutely. And in this day and age where people are on pitch counts or on innings, innings limits, stuff like that, you might see a guy like Pedro be able to sneak in and he deserves it, but you know what I mean, sneak in by getting on the first ballot or a couple years later down the road. But I certainly do think Pedro Martinez is a Hall of Famer. It's getting interesting, too, with the Hall of Fame, and I don't want to get too in-depth with this, but things are starting to kind of get piled up again because next year, obviously, is the Ken Griffey Jr. class of the for the Baseball Hall of Fame. So things start to get a little piled up, and players who are deserving of the Hall of Fame may not get in because there are so many players and there's so little amount of players that can be voted in each year. I think it's 5. So if you have 9 guys or 10 guys who deserve to be in the Hall of Fame and you can only vote 5 in, you have to get, I think, 75% of the vote for those 5 guys. So as we've seen in the past how the voters have voted, it may not end up so well. It may get very confusing and things may thicken up pretty quick, but we all know who deserves to be a Baseball Hall of Famer. And actually, this week, I kind of locked down a future podcast with myself and John Cimino of Get Ready America, to discuss the Baseball Hall of Fame and who we believe are Hall of Famers and kind of a more in-depth conversation about that whole thing with the Baseball Hall of Fame, with the steroid era, with does it really matter if you have 500 home runs or 300 wins anymore, stuff like that. A very interesting talk, I'm sure, to be had. But keep an eye out for that. I'm sure it'll be happening because the Hall of Fame votes come out in January, so I think the show will happen sometime in the month of December. But as for that, like I said, stay tuned. When we get back from the commercial break, we're going to talk some National Football League. Going to talk Calvin Johnson. Can he be the greatest wide receiver in the history of football? Also, Ray Rice's suspension has been lifted by the National Football League. He has been reinstated. He is a free agent. We'll talk more about that. Also, you'll get our weekly NFL picks sponsored by FanDuel. Stick around for more of the Better Live Than Dead podcast right after this.
This free and independent sportscast is made possible when you shop the Gear Network store through Amazon. Visit GearNetwork.com and click on the Amazon banner to shop through Amazon's thousands of products at great prices delivered right to your front door. Again, that's GearNetwork.com and click the Amazon banner at the top.
Gear Network listeners, November's song of the month is Born to Raise Hell by Motorhead, and it was suggested by Better Live Than Dead's Ryan Wolf. I enjoy it. You should too. We have 2 ways for you to get it through Gear Network. Yes, you can go to GearNetwork.com/iTunes and pay $1.29. Download it on your iPhone like I did, or you can go to GearNetwork.com/Amazon and get it through Amazon MP3 via the Gear Radio Network for 89 cents. That's right. iTunes person, $1.29. Normal people, 89 cents. Hey, whatever you like. It's all up to you, but you can please get it through GearNetwork.com. You can rock out. Rock out! I'm not going to finish that sentence, but through GearNetwork.com. Do it!
And we are back on the Better Live Than Dead podcast to talk some National Football League. And joining me now on the line, a good friend of the podcast, Chris Downey. He is the athletic communications assistant at Newberry College, at CJDowney92 on Twitter. He also happens to write for SabersHockeyCentral.com. How you doing tonight, man?
Doing well, just hanging out and relaxing after a long weekend of work.
Well, thank you for taking the time out to join us. I know it was kind of last minute, but you certainly saved my tail because, as mentioned before, my voice is not doing so well today, so I certainly do appreciate the help.
I'm in the same boat there with you. That time of year again for most of the people, huh?
Oh, absolutely. The allergies are just terrible. I want to start off today with the big news of the week. Ex-Baltimore Ravens running back Ray Rice had his indefinite suspension lifted. The judge in the case ruled that Ray Rice, quote, did not mislead Roger Goodell. Ray Rice originally told Roger Goodell that he had hit his wife, not that she knocked herself out, which is what the NFL had previously stated had happened. Roger Goodell also told Ray Rice that when they made the new domestic violence policy, that old domestic violence cases will be grandfathered in, so you can't be charged twice for the same crime. But then he subsequently did charge Ray Rice twice for the same crime. But Ray Rice is now a free agent, can sign with any football team. I guess the first question I have for you, Chris, is do you see any National Football League team taking a shot on Ray Rice right now?
Right now, it depends on where they are running back situation. If you want to throw in the Bills, for example, yeah, we're Bills fans, but if you want to throw that in there, they're down their 2 running backs in C.J. Spiller and Fred Jackson, so maybe. But they're also running well with Boobie Dixon as well as Bryce Brown carrying the load, so who knows who will take a flyer on him. They know that there's going to be a PR storm coming in with the guy that hit his wife and got suspended essentially twice by the NFL. I don't see anyone taking a flyer on him right now, but if they need a running back before playoff time hits and they need someone to sign quick, you got a guy out there who's proven that he can carry the load for a team.
Well, the interesting thing about the whole situation is that there have been some rumblings that a few teams may be interested. They certainly aren't speaking out and saying they're interested because they don't want the PR flack, as you mentioned. But a team like Indianapolis, who has their head coach, Chuck Pagano, has a past with Ray Rice, as Chuck Pagano was a defensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens for some time. And obviously, Ray Rice was a Baltimore Raven. But you look at it now, and while I personally do believe he has earned a second chance, as many people do in this world, you screw up, you do the crime, do time, if you will. You own up to your mistakes, no matter how bad the mistake may be. Because I know there's no reason why you should try to cover up the fact that you beat your wife. I mean, that's a deplorable thing. It's terrible, like I said, but he'll get a second shot, and I certainly think it won't be this year because we're so close to the playoffs. I mean, unless, like you said, unless a horrific injury happens somewhere and a team goes, you know what, we think we're good enough to win the Super Bowl, but now that our running back is hurt, we can't. We need a running back. I mean, a lot of people are saying Ray Rice is on the downside of his career and all this stuff, but he's not played the whole season, and so he's fresh, he's healthy. When he played, he still showed he was a good running back. I mean, maybe this year, but most likely a team will take a flyer on him in training camp next year and say, hey, you got to earn your spot because we're not going to give it to you. And I'm sure he'll make a comeback because if there's anything the NFL loves, it's a good comeback story. No matter the situation, they love to be able to say, hey, we had terrible people here and now they're better. And as pathetic as it sounds, it's what they do.
And going off of looking better, look at what happened to Mike Vick when he served his time for what he did with his dogfighting ring. He's not on the top of his career now, but when he came back, he tore it up.
They were more than happy to have him back.
Oh yeah, posting big numbers, and he's not doing the best that he has, but I mean he did well when he came back. That's no doubt.
Well, and the other thing to look at too in the situation is have we started to see the cracks in the foundation of Roger Goodell? Because essentially this judge who ruled in favor of Ray Rice flat out said that Roger Goodell stepped over the boundary of what he's allowed to do as the commissioner of football. He tried to double suspend a player for a crime that he was already suspended for. And he essentially, and Roger Goodell was lying the whole time because he knew Ray Rice did. He knew Ray Rice hit his wife and knocked his wife out. But it's almost as if he tried to sweep it under the rug to make it a less of a problem. And that's not good to hear and not good to see. And it certainly seems to me, at least, that we're starting to see kind of some cracks in the foundation of Roger Goodell's tenure as commissioner of the National Football League.
Yeah, Roger Goodell, people wanted him gone. I know some people have discussed about wanting him gone after this whole debacle, which that would be a big thing to have happen. But you're right. I think there are cracks in what he does as a commissioner. You can tell that by just what he did here with Ray Rice, as well as another big example to kind of diverge off the domestic violence is what's going on now with concussions. As he said within the past year, I believe it was, that football doesn't cause concussions and that they provide ample warning to the players. Now, whether that can go on him fully or back on the previous commissioner in Tagliabue as well. Who knows? But the fact that these reports were coming out within the past year, 6 months to a year, on a documentary by PBS saying that, that football causes these concussions, they could cause CTE, which has caused brain damage and death, as well as many traumas among players, including Darryl Talley, which was the recent one that came out. Having these issues for him can be a big downfall if he's not consistent.
Well, it's certainly showing like he's kind of taking a shot in the dark with everything, because the other situation that popped into my head, obviously, was the Adrian Peterson situation that's currently going on. They're trying to essentially, the Vikings don't want him back, but the Vikings don't want to cut him, it seems like, because Peterson pled no contest, served his time, and said, okay, I'm ready to come back, and they said, no, you're going to be suspended indefinitely. And they doesn't seem like they really know what they want to do. Excuse me, and that's quite evident. In the same situation with Ray Rice is the same situation with Adrian Peterson. It almost seems like Goodell does not know what he wants to do, so he just says go away for a while, and when we figure out what we're going to do, we'll take care of it. But until then, we're just going to pretend like you don't exist anymore. And that's not really appearing to work for the National Football League. And that's one thing the NFLPA pointed out. They said that Roger Goodell is kind of just governing the league on the fly, and it can't be like that, because if you're going to suspend a guy for 10 games for domestic violence, suspend the next guy 10 games. You can't suspend one guy 6 games and then suspend another guy 12 games and then suspend another guy indefinitely. I mean, if he gets charged, that's one thing, but if he pleads, like they said, Adrian Peterson pled no contest. Ray Rice also pled to a lesser charge. So really, what else is there left to do? Like, I understand with Greg Hardy, he appealed he was convicted of domestic violence or domestic assault, whatever the situation was with that case, and he appealed the ruling. I get why he's not playing, because he's appealing a guilty verdict, so he can't play. But Adrian Peterson has pled no contest. Ray Rice is pled down, like I said, and served the time. And, until this week, we had no progress. So hopefully this ruling helps out the Adrian Peterson camp and allows us to figure out what the hell Roger Goodell is trying to do, because I don't think anybody, even Roger Goodell, knows what Roger Goodell is trying to do.
Well, in Adrian Peterson case, that came out a short while after the Ray Rice incident came out. So I think he's not only, I wouldn't say governing on the fly with as much with that one, but is being cautious on that, instead of issuing a suspension and then, this hearing came out and he pled no contest to this one, let me reissue it. That would have been similar to Ray Rice, but I think he's waiting to see what the investigation comes out with, because that's still going on in regards to Adrian Peterson's issue. And in your reference to what you said about the Vikings keeping on to him, I think he has a lot more value than what Ray Rice has to a football team, not to discredit anything of Rice. But if you say to a team, we don't want the Viking, or we don't want him, and the Vikings can say, this is what we want for him, he's still a great running back, yeah, he'll have a PR issue similar to what Rice will have. He's levels above Ray Rice and what he can do for a football team going forward, and it'll go, and the Vikings will get something in return. Unlike the Ravens who cut Rice, unless there's something in the collective bargaining that won't allow them to get, or that they can get something for Rice, they let Rice go and they won't get anything for him. Unlike the Vikings, who probably want at least a player and a pick for Peterson, depending on how high they drive up that bargain.
Well, I know, and I don't want to keep beating a dead horse here, but like you said, with them wanting something, I don't know. It's a very interesting scenario. It's a very interesting situation. It's uncharted territory. Nobody really knows what's happening with that, because it doesn't seem like the Vikings want him back, because it's a like you said, it's a PR nightmare. Because essentially, whenever you get a player back, it's almost like, hey, people will automatically say, well, we don't condone Adrian Peterson's actions, and then someone will come back and say, well, he's on your team, so clearly you condone something. And then you start from there with the petty crap, and then it becomes a giant PR nightmare, and some people just don't want to deal with that. I mean, at some point in time, yes, it will go away, and it'll be essentially a footnote
we'll never forget about this stuff. I mean, with Ray Rice and with Adrian Peterson, it'll never be like, oh yeah, I don't remember that happening, because that's one of the first things you'll hear about, and rightfully so, because it's, again, a deplorable act. But I can't see, the Vikings trying to hold out, because if they continue to hold out long enough, you could start to see some legal action taking place, I would assume, because the NFLPA is not messing around with this. The NFLPA is, while the NFL tries to set their precedents for making unlimited suspensions essentially on certain players, the NFLPA is trying to go, okay, well, we want to know next time. So if a guy, is accused and convicted of domestic assault, he gets, 6 games. That's it. We're going to solve it. We're going to stop it there. 6 games, no pay. Then we move on. While I understand there's a new policy out there, there's still room for interpretation and kind of wiggle room to figure things out still. And that's what this whole situation is, because as mentioned previously, it's a Goodell governing on the fly, and nobody really knows what's going on. So as time goes on, I'm sure we'll figure it out. And I do assume that opening weekend of the 2015 NFL season, that both Adrian Peterson and Ray Rice will be on a National Football League roster. That just makes the most sense to me. But with that being said, I want to transition over to the other topic I had to discuss this week about the National Football League. On Thanksgiving, Calvin Johnson topped 10,000 receiving yards in his career. He currently sits at 10,052, which is the 9th most active receiving yards. He was the fastest to 10,000 yards in 115 games. And the interesting thing about that is he is 43rd all time with his 10,052 yards, only 8 away from 42nd, which would be passing Shannon Sharp. Now, Calvin Johnson currently has 71 touchdowns, which is 5th active. He should have no issue hitting 100 touchdowns in his career, which would put him at least in the top 7 all time in the history of wide receivers in the National Football League. He has 621 receptions, which is 13th active. Also, something interesting to point out, he averages 87.4 yards per game, which is the most active, as well as the most active yards per game, as well as the most all-time yards per game by a wide receiver. So the question I have for you, Chris, is it possible for Calvin Johnson to be the greatest wide receiver that we've ever seen? I mean, obviously right now, Terrell Owens is second with 15,934 yards. Jerry Rice is leaps and bounds ahead of that at 20,895. But is there any possible way, when all is said and done, that Calvin Johnson goes in the books as the best wide receiver in the history of the National Football League?
Best receiver I've seen, yes. Now, I didn't watch Jerry Rice much when I was younger. Maybe I did, I don't remember, but I don't remember him as vividly as I would Calvin Johnson. So right now I would say Johnson is the best wide receiver in the league and the best in the past few years. Now, best wide receiver of all time, these discussions always give me a good chuckle, because you're comparing 2 different generations of sports, in this case football, where things have changed, times have changed, the style of play has changed. You're seeing different style quarterbacks. You're seeing more mobile quarterbacks. Now, that's not in the case of Matt Stafford in Detroit. But you got to wonder is, when you brought this question up to me earlier, my thought was, is Matt Stafford going to be as good as the quarterbacks that were throwing to Jerry Rice, namely Steve Young back in his day? Now, with that question, Calvin Johnson is putting up great numbers, and he'll probably be top 3 all time, depending when he finishes his career. Now, as for, just to answer your question in one word, will he be the greatest receiver all time? Probably not. And yes, it was 2 words. But of this generation, yes. Definitely yes. Looking back on it, you'll have generational receivers, and Calvin Johnson is definitely the generational receiver for the past 5 to 7 years that we've seen.
I mean, if he can stay healthy, I know Matt Stafford throws the ball anywhere from 600 to 700 times a season. Calvin Johnson gets the ball a lot, but as mentioned, he also gets a lot of yards per game, and he's got a lot of touchdowns too, which is actually kind of surprising, because when you look at the age of all the active players around him, he has got a couple years on all the guys around him. I mean, he's only 29 years old, and he's already racking up some impressive records, so he's got an impressive pace to rack up some impressive records, I should say. But I think if Matt Stafford can stick around and continue to throw for 4,000 yards a season, and Calvin Johnson can stay healthy and age gracefully, because that's the one thing we always see is that usually the speed and powerful wide receivers don't age so gracefully, and he's a big guy who's very powerful and he's got some speed. So, time may not be on his side in the next couple of seasons, but I mean, you figure there's a handful of games left this season. He could probably hit 1,000 yards in this season. So you'd have to figure if he goes and hits, I'm trying to think here, if he hits maybe 10-5 this season, if he's at 10,500 yards this season, he'll only need 4,500 yards or something like that to get past Terrell Owens. I mean, that's doable because as mentioned, when he's healthy, he's getting probably 1,200 to 1,400 yards a season. I mean, this year he's not healthy, so he's only got I think 724 right now. After missing the Bills game, he was injured after a couple, I think one or two catches, then missed 3 games, out 4 weeks, obviously with the bye week. But I agree with what you said. He's certainly the best wide receiver we're going to see this generation. I mean, the most recent NFL rookie draft class created some nice wide receivers like your Sammy Watkins, your Odell Beckham Jr.'s. There's actually they say that the most recent wide receiver draft class was one of the deepest ever. But it's hard to judge when they're so young. But when you see a guy like Calvin Johnson get his 10,000th yard, you can look back and put it into perspective. And speaking of putting Calvin Johnson into perspective, man, you still got to think those Oakland Raiders are kicking themselves in the ass for drafting Jamarcus Russell over Calvin Johnson years ago.
Yeah, Jamarcus Russell, what an icon.
Biggest draft bust, and it almost makes it worse because if you go bust on a guy and the next guy wasn't so great and you go bust on him too or something, it's a little better. But when you go bust hard on a quarterback and then the next guy drafted is one of the greatest wide receivers we're ever going to see. I mean, granted, he's got Matt Stafford who throws the ball to him a lot, but you put Calvin Johnson with anybody, Calvin Johnson's going to make him look good. That's no slight against Matt Stafford because Matt Stafford is a damn good quarterback. But
and talking about your wide receiver point, how they drift off, just think of Larry Fitzgerald. That was a name that came to mind when I was doing some researching. He was good for 5-6 years, second year on. For the past few years, he's kind of dwindled off.
Well, you got to remember too, the quarterbacks. He's had some quarterbacks that should never be in the NFL that he's had to make do with. I mean, his production has tailed off. He's been injured a little, but I'll tell you what, dude. If you told me I could go to battle with Larry Fitzgerald every week, I'm there 10 times out of 10.
I would not disagree with that one.
But then again, being a Buffalo Bills fan, we go to battle every week this season with Sammy Watkins, and oh boy, that's going to be a lot of fun.
Some quarterbacks that are questionable in the league, right there.
Yeah, because we're going to look back on it, and hopefully in 10 years when the Bills have a franchise quarterback and go, yeah, I remember when E.J. Manuel and Kyle Orton were throwing to him, and now he's got this guy. He'll have his own Matt Stafford.
You'll be like, E.J. Manuel who? I
hope so. I mean, I don't want to get ahead of myself.
That's bad to say. That's bad to say a couple of years in, but the way things are turning out.
Well, maybe that's a conversation that you and I can have at a different time on the podcast. Is how early is too early to give up on a quarterback? Because obviously the Bills give up quick, but the thing is, if you hit your wagon to a sinking rock, or hit your ship to an anchor that's pulling the ship down, at some point in time you got to cut bait and say, hey, we're going to move on. And I look at it. I mean, Seattle got kind of lucky with Russell Wilson the first year and on since then. But when they brought Matt Flynn in on that big contract, they cut bait before season even started. They said, this guy is better than Matt Flynn, this guy being Russell Wilson. And they were not afraid. Where the Buffalo Bills seem to be, hey, we've got Kyle Orton. Kyle Orton is a worthwhile quarterback. But we want to give EJ a shot. And I think they pulled the trigger on the EJ move at a good time. But, it probably would have been nicer if they had done it earlier because the Bills may have had a few more wins and been able to be in the playoff picture a little more. But I can't remember the cliche saying I was going to throw around. Ifs and buts were something, but we beggars can't be choosers. We got our Buffalo Bills, and they are what they are, and we have to get used to it, unfortunately.
Exactly. What we suffered through since 2000.
I've already mentioned on this podcast before, the first Bills game I remember watching was the Music City Miracle, so I've not had good Bills football in my entire life, so.
Yeah.
Moving on now.
Did some research real quick before we move on.
Okay.
You mentioned the 2007 draft and how the Raiders were kicking themselves. Also in that draft was some familiar names here, mainly Adrian Peterson and a running back out of California by Marshawn Lynch.
That's the one thing that's the one thing I was kicked. I always laughed about Adrian Peterson is they always said that he was injury prone, and then he came in the league and the first big injury he had is when he blew his knee out.
Yes, and he came back and he absolutely destroyed it.
Yep. Now, Chris, you don't have to put your input in on this segment because it has nothing. It honestly has absolutely nothing to do with you, but you can stick around for sure. Moving on now to our weekly, Gear Network Pick'em, sponsored by FanDuel. As usual now, as what's become a force of habit, you can see our picks over on GearNetwork.com on the blogs. You can see it on our Facebook page, on the Gear Network's Facebook page, or you can just listen to the podcast and we'll tell you all about them. This week, we all agreed on Detroit over Chicago, Dallas over Philadelphia, Cincinnati over Tampa Bay, St. Louis over Oakland, Minnesota over Carolina, the Giants over the Jaguars, Indianapolis over Washington, Houston over Tennessee, Arizona over Atlanta, Denver over Kansas City, and then Miami over the New York Jets. The games in question, which you can read more about on GearNetwork.com, Seattle and San Francisco, Cleveland and Buffalo, New Orleans and Pittsburgh, San Diego and Baltimore, and New England and Green Bay. And a little bit of a spoiler alert over here, actually. Perez picked against myself and John on the Seattle and San Francisco game. So right now, as we speak, headed into the weekend, myself and Perez are tied in first place, and then John finds himself one game back. So these games in question are surely going to have a big effect on the overall standings heading towards Week 14 and heading towards the NFL playoffs. But I just hope for my sake that I have a good weekend. I hope that the Buffalo Bills beat the Cleveland Browns because I picked the Buffalo Bills this week, and as I said in a previous blog post, I am a hopeless romantic when it comes to the Buffalo Bills. So we'll see what happens, but I certainly think the Buffalo Bills can beat the Cleveland Browns this week at Ralph Wilson Stadium.
That's not debatable in my book. I think they'll come out and they'll use the fans who missed out on a home game yet again, this time due to unforeseen circumstances and not a law-binding contract with those folks up in the northern part of the continent with that contract. But they lost a home game, and you can expect the Ralphs to be rocking on Sunday against Cleveland.
Well, hey man, I look forward to it. It's going to be a damn good football game because Cleveland is 7-4, I believe. Yeah, 7-4 because everyone in the north has 7 wins. The Bengals leading with 7-3-1. Everyone else is 7-4, which just blows my mind because any other season Cleveland goes 7-4. They're strong in the playoff hunt. This year they could be on the outside looking in because they went 7-5 instead of 7-4 or 8-4 instead of 7-5. Or vice versa, I'm sorry. If they go 7-5 instead of 8-4, they could be on the outside looking in, which is madness. But Chris, you want to stick around? Do you want to stick around to close out the podcast with me? You got time?
I can do that. I have plenty of time.
Stick around. When we get back from these commercial breaks, we'll take the podcast home. A very, very odd, thrown together, exciting episode, always exciting episode of the Better Alive Than Dead podcast. Stick around for more.
A successful product does not become a successful product on its own. Look at the Gear Radio Network, for example. We're a prime example. We had a lot of help getting here, and we can help you get where you want to go to. Advertising rates are very low to start off here on the Gear Radio Network. Visit us at GearNetwork.com. Click on the contact link to send us an email, and we can work out the details. Again, advertise your product across all of the forums at a low, low rate here on the Gear Radio Network.
Do you enjoy listening to Better Live Than Dead, but you're not always by your laptop to hear it on GearNetwork.com? Not to worry, we've got you covered. Better Live Than Dead and all other Gear Network podcasts can now be heard on iHeartRadio, iTunes, in the Zune Marketplace, on SoundCloud, Spreaker, Stitcher Radio, and on TuneIn Radio. So make sure you get one of the aforementioned apps to stay up to date with the latest Gear Network podcasts.
And we are back on the Better Live Than Dead podcast to wrap things up. As I always say, take it home, a wrestling term. I like to throw that one around a lot. But first of all, I want to say thank you to Chris for joining me at last minute to talk the National Football League. It was a pleasure.
I had a pleasure. First time joining the podcast. Hopefully it's not the last, and I'll keep on listening.
I do appreciate you listening, and we get a few more ears on it now because we got another person, a new fresh face in the podcast. As mentioned, you can follow him on Twitter at CJDowney92. Certainly a good follow as always. I want to say a big get well soon, as mentioned earlier in the podcast, to our friend Jules, who suffered 3 seizures in 1 week. A big part of the wrestling family. Get well soon, man. Also, a very big get well soon to my co-host, Mr. Perez, who apparently came down with an acute version of the bubonic plague this morning. So hopefully he gets well soon. We can have him back in studios next week. I want to say thank you to John Cimino, the host of Get Ready America, the voice behind JC Money on JC Money Uncensored Podcast. I'm sorry, John. I just totally went blank on your podcast name there, but check it out on GearNetwork.com. Check everything out on GearNetwork.com. Follow all of us. As I said, Chris CJ Downey 92. I'm at WolfSHC. Mr. Perez, MRLG Perez. John is at the JC Money. Don't forget to go to GearNetwork.com and Gear Network on Facebook. Use our Amazon link. It's getting to be about that time. Black Friday was just a few days ago. As well as everyone's got to get their Christmas presents somehow. Go to Amazon.com. Click our link on our page. You get good deals through Amazon.com, and you help us out in the process, help keep things free. Help us get better equipment. Overall, everyone will be happy because you'll have Christmas presents and we'll have new awesome equipment, and we'll be so happy and thankful that you did it. But for Chris, I am Ryan saying we are better live than dead. You are not. We will see you next week, the same time, same place, my friends. Have a great week. Thanks again for tuning in.